Good morning, everybody. Boy, it's cold outside. And then we'll be complaining in a few months from now. Oh, I wish spring would go away. And then summer, I hate this heat. And we're right back where we started. All right, there we go. Maybe if you're like me and you're a kid and you want to ask God all these questions, then maybe when you stand before God, you can ask Him, why four seasons? Why couldn't we just have spring all year round? Then you'd be sneezing and complaining about that, my child. So we'll just learn to be content with what He's given us. We are coming really to the end of this series. The last lesson in the series is be Christ-like. Be Christ-like. When we began this series back in September, we began with talking about a plea for civil behavior, and we did this from the pen of the Apostle Paul, from where he wrote in the book of Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. And Paul had this to say. He said, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or deceit, but in humility count others more important than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others." And what Paul was saying in a nutshell is, it's not about me, 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 me. If we don't have care, concern, empathy, love, sympathy for others, then we just didn't get it. And in the end, what we hoped for, we will be denied because we kept it about myself. These words that Paul wrote here in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 and 4, they're especially noteworthy against the backdrop of Paul's early life. Think about Paul. Before Paul met Jesus Christ, what was Paul like? Just think about those words that you know about him as Saul, right? Anybody want to describe him? Mean. He was probably the chief persecutor of Christians throughout the world. Anything else? I haven't said anything good yet, right? Well, the bottom line is you're absolutely right. Humility and empathy were not qualities of that man. Paul's leading qualities had nothing to do with humility and empathy. He was religious and he was zealous, but he was not kind. He was not considerate of other people. A Christian life is a considerate life. Consider one another to stir up good works and love. That's the essence of the Christian life. And in context of human history, we know that some may see inconsiderateness as a small sin, almost not even noticeable. But the word inconsiderate in and of itself means to cause hurt, to cause pain for someone. Didn't say how small it had to be, but you cause pain for someone. Most of the world's pain is caused by carelessness, is caused by selfishness, is caused by causing pain for someone. Whether it's me as a human being towards another human being, or how about a leader of a world country or something, not really having care and concern for the quality of life of God's people. Those are the things that incivility really comes from. Now, as you eliminate little acts of insensitivity from your life, larger ones will take care of themselves. But James says this in James chapter 1, verse 15. If you ignore the little ones, as James says, and he says, sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So seemingly small sins can and often do have huge or large consequences. Inconsiderateness is one of those. Inconsiderateness can lead to the death of relationships. Just simply not caring who you hurt or how you hurt them. It can lead to the death of relationships. It can also lead to the death of your soul. You may have inflicted pain on someone else through your lack of consideration, but now you've put your own soul and its eternal destination to heaven in jeopardy. Darkened mind, seared consciences, and hardened hearts occur when human faculties lose their sensitivity to God's will and to the needs of God's people. However small they be aware of inconsiderate remarks. You know, we hear the old saying that, you know, once you ring that bell as it comes out of your mouth, you can't unring it. You've said something hurtful and harmful to someone or done something. Just know that God keeps a record of those things. And today, as we try to wrap up, just continue to think, consider one another, be Christ-like. If you want to look at Acts chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, we'll talk there for a moment about this man, Saul. Saul the Pharisee, he was selfish, he was ambitious, and he was, I was going to say, perhaps a little conceited, but he was probably quite conceited, at least in what he did. He climbed the ladder of success on the backs of people that he destroyed. You cannot do what Saul did and be sensitive to other people's feelings. You must go stone cold to be that mean. And believe me, there's nothing new under the sun. And Saul was not the only one during his time. And even yet still today, there are Sauls out there who are stone cold. And yes, just that mean. Like Paul said, Luke said this, that Paul ravaged the church, rather. And to ravage something is to ruin it or to devastate it. And the people Saul persecuted, they were no danger to anyone else. They were not even disturbing the peace. But nonetheless, he dedicated and committed his life to hunting them down. He went into their homes without invitations. He would drag the women out of their houses, away from the arms of loved ones, and he would confine them in primitive prisons. In stark contrast to this brutality, he carefully protected the coats of his colleagues to keep them clean and safe and unwrinkled, while they took stones to break men's bones and to crush the life from their bodies. When Saul was not persecuting Christians, he was thinking about it, how he could be better at what he did. When he was not persecuting Christians, he was talking about it to others in his cause. He boasted that he would do more and that he could find worse ways to do things to drive these Christians to where he could get them and imprison them and kill them. He vented about it, he ranted, and he threatened without the slightest embarrassment or hesitation. This man, Saul, would publicly express his intent to slaughter his fellow countrymen with whom he had religious differences. He spoke of violently and cruelly killing followers of Christ. When you don't know people personally, it's far easier to mistreat them. We talked about that some time back. Remember, we talked about your chosen seats in the church building and how guests would come in and had nowhere to go because you had closed off the ends and they either had to walk all the way down the front. We didn't see that as maybe a possible act of being insensitive, but now we think about it, yes. And we may have sent a message to that person that we didn't want to send. So, yes, be Christ-like. When Saul did these things, he felt justified in his vile actions because he judged all Christians of one thing: you deserve to be dead. You deserve to be dead. Then one day, everything changed, didn't it? Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 9. Saul had a meeting. Saul was en route to Damascus. We know that he was on the road to Damascus to arrest Christians and to return them to Jerusalem to stand trial and face punishment. He had letters from the high priest giving him the legal authority to go after and to apprehend these people that he's called criminals fleeing justice. But the day in question, it didn't end as Paul had thought it would. You see, Jesus, who appeared on earth in the fullness of time to save sinners, Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, Jesus made a special appearance to save the worst of all sinners. 1 Timothy 1:15. Saul was the true lawbreaker, skirting divine justice, and Jesus was coming to make an arrest. As they approached the outskirts of the city, a burst of light robbed Saul of his eyesight. And that flash of light drove him from his mount to the ground. And from that humble position on the ground, the proud persecutor heard a voice from heaven. Acts chapter 9 and verse 4. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? You see, Jesus, who had come to make the arrest, revealed his identity. And he directed Saul to enter the city where he would be told what to do. Saul's companions led him by the hand to a residence on Straight Street in Damascus. And they must have pitied this man that everybody lived in terror of, because at this point he was helpless. He was helpless even before them. So this once intimidating figure was now a weak and powerless man. And it seemed like the worst thing that could have happened to Saul. In fact, though, it was the best. It was exactly what he needed to awaken him from the spiritual blindness that he had committed himself to, brought on by nothing more than pure and simple hatred. Now his eyes would be opened to the power and the possibilities of love. Did I see your hand on the screen? Okay. So his eyes would be open, though, to the power and the possibilities of love. Acts chapter 9, still there, verses 10 through 19. The messenger here, after 3 days of soul searching, Saul received the message from Jesus. And the news came from a reluctant messenger by the name of Ananias. Saul entered people's houses to harm them, but Ananias came there to help him. Ananias was hesitant to approach Saul due to his reputation. Any of us would have been reluctant. But the Lord assured him that things were different now. And when Jesus said things are different, you can put your stock in that. It's different. You see, Saul's heart was captive to Christ at this point, and he would work even harder to advance the gospel than he had previously put so much energy and time into opposing it. So Ananias came to heal Saul's eyes, to save his soul, and to prepare him for service. First, he laid hands on him to restore his sight. And next, he baptized him for forgiveness. And finally, he told Saul that God had selected him to be his missionary to the Gentiles. And in this amazing turn of events, this once angry man, this one insensitive man, was now on a mission to rescue the world from all the inhumane effects of sin with which he was personally acquainted. And we know that even from 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, what did Saul at that point say about himself? Or what did Paul eventually say? He says, I am the chief of sinners. He saw himself as the world's worst of sinners. Well, he has become arrested by Christ. And through his eyes at this point, the world looked very different now that Paul or Saul was seeing the world through the eyes of Jesus. So saying be Christ-like in our daily walk, we must see the world through the eyes of Jesus. If we don't, we just aren't getting it. Saul, awakened, forgiven, and commissioned, he was now eager to do for others what had been done for him. Think about all of the accounts of conversion that we know of in our lifetimes. This was conversion at its very best. It showed not only the power that Jesus had, but it showed the love that Jesus had. Could you imagine a world of that time where you and I would be in it, and this man has killed and slaughtered most of our family for being what? A Christian. And now suddenly you're in the place of Ananias, sent by God to this man that Jesus has arrested. And you are really the one who's in concert through God to do conversion at its very best. Acts chapter 9, and going on through verses 19 through 22. A convincing evidence of Jesus' resurrection is the astounding change in the life of this man, Saul. Explaining his transformation, this is what is said, Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20. He says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. That's the power of Jesus' love. We must see the world through the eyes of Jesus Christ. What does it mean to live by faith in the Son of God? What does it mean? Well, I'm going to say I'm putting myself in the place of Ananias because I'm going to do something that I otherwise probably would not have done. But I'm doing it because I trust God implicitly. I'm letting him order my steps even when I'm not sure. I'm letting him guide me even when I'm not sure I understand at all. But that's how we must be Christ-like, by seeing his world, this world through his eyes. It means to trust him implicitly. Saul's experience on the road to Damascus convinced him that Jesus was Lord, but he also believed that Jesus loved him. In spite of him, Saul believed that Jesus loved him, knowing he was undeserving of such mercy. And if you and I look at our lives, we may not be able to say, well, I didn't do anything nearly as bad as Saul did, But I know my mother would make it clear if I told you not to take a cookie out the cookie jar and you did, but then you can't lie to me and say, well, that was different. Sin is sin is sin is sin is sin, isn't it? And so here we go. Knowing that he was undeserving of such mercy, he began and ended every letter celebrating God's grace and the peace it afforded. Go and open pretty much every book that Paul wrote. Grace and peace and mercy from our Lord Jesus Christ. And this was a man whose full-time occupation was killing Christians. The power of an arrest by Jesus. When Saul realized how much Jesus loved him, he also experienced a peace that passes all understanding. A peaceful life is marked by wellness and wholeness, and loving people are kind and calm. The opposite, unloving people are turbulent and troublesome. Damaged relationships are evidence of souls lacking grace and peace. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 5, the model here. Paul became a channel of the grace and peace that he received from God. He preached it, he practiced it, and consequently, one of the world's most inconsiderate men became a model of Christ-likeness. He was now able to see the world through the eyes of Jesus. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul used this example to challenge and inspire us and others. He said, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Some do it to mock or entertain, and in this case, the goal is to edify and to glorify. Paul often called on people to follow him, but the goal was never about him. It was never self-promotion. He used his example to help people to know and follow Christ. And every day he would show people the beauty and the benefits of Christian living. Consider one another to stir up love and good spirits. Every day he would show people that consideration. By following someone who is faithfully following Christ, you become more Christ-like. And there's truth to that cliche that says, you know, each of us is a walking sermon to people who are in need. What are we giving them? What message are we giving? What lesson are we giving them? So by following someone who is faithfully following Jesus Christ, you become more Christ-like. And the best part is that following Christ produces joy in your life and in the lives of those around you. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 6. Choices. We have choices. Misery-producing people have a choice. They can awaken to the devastation that they inflict on those around them, or they can die lonely, live a life despised, being self-righteous, and unprepared for the judgment. You see, Jesus confronted Saul on the road to Damascus, but he's confronting you and I too on the road to our future. Jesus is teaching an example, a burst of heavenly light that allow you to see the awfulness of being insensitive and the attractiveness of being considerate. Ananias was sent to open Saul's eyes, and this book was written to open our eyes. The Bible was written for us to open our eyes. Can you see the faces of people that you have been injuring? Can you see the faces of people that you ignore? Do you see the opportunities for thoughtfulness and kindness that you might have been overlooking, just not seeing it for what it was? The goal of life is Christ likeness. The goal of life is Christ likeness. And the essence of Christ likeness is considerateness. The Bible teaches us that love is the greatest command. Yet, what is love but kindness that grows out of thoughtfulness? Kindness that grows out of thoughtfulness. I can say I love you, but I cannot love you without first thinking of you. That's why consideration is the foundation of love and the basis of all the good that you will do in your lifetime. It makes you careful not to hurt someone. It makes you careful not to inconvenience someone. It makes you careful not to burden others needlessly. But desiring not to harm others is insufficient. You must endeavor to help them and to bless them. Love is proactive as well as protective. And that's why the golden rule is the supreme law of life. Think of the golden rule as, if you would, in our current time, and it is a spiritual app. The golden rule is a spiritual app. It's a mobile version of the great commandments that are stored conveniently in your memory. You can take it with you everywhere and you can apply it in any situation. It is doing others good by considering their needs as you reflect on your own desires. It takes warm impulses of your heart and turns them into action, instant action. Empathy, one of the first words that we discussed in length when we started this. Empathy is the indispensable quality of a considerate life. You must care about the needs of other people. David marveled at the attractiveness of God in caring for mankind, and he wrote this in Psalm chapter 8, verse 4. He said, "What is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him?" What is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the essence of love, and Jesus modeled his mindset for his disciples. To possess the mind of Christ is to be constantly aware and to pay consistent attention to the needs of others. In the beginning, Jesus was thinking of you when he created the world with all of its delights. All the colors, the smells, the textures, the sounds, the taste, these things were all made with humanity in mind. Now, although, we may tend to wonder about some of the smells when you drive down the highway and a skunk has either been hit by a car or something, you wonder what that smell is about. Well, like I said, God, I got a question for you. Why did skunks have to smell so bad? Okay, don't you want to get to ask some of those questions? Okay, now, just know you may not get the answer that you want, okay? But when the world was created, we were in mind of the Creator. Jesus was thinking of you when the world was plunged into sin by the careless actions of Adam and Eve. And as a result, paradise was lost. Death became a reality, and pain entered everyday life. Now, obviously, their plan was not well considered, but God's response was. In due time, the seed of woman, Christ, would crush the head of Satan, Genesis 3:15. And in Eden, Jesus was already thinking of you. We know that sin increased on the earth until God sent a flood to stop the spread of wickedness. And during this deluge, Jesus was thinking of you. He knew the flood foreshadowed the spiritual reset that would occur one day at baptism. Peter wrote this in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 21. Peter wrote, baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And later, the call of Abraham set in motion God's plan for saving mankind. And as the scheme of redemption would unfold, Jesus was thinking of you every step of the way. He once told a group of argumentative Jews, he said to them, John chapter 8 and verse 58, Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. Before Abraham was, I am. And Paul noted the remarkable link between the father of the faithful, his true children. And Jesus wrote this in Galatians chapter 3, verse 29. If you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to promise. So throughout sacred history, Christ was working on your behalf. Jesus was thinking of you when he arrived from heaven on his this great rescue mission, the greatest rescue mission of all time. Jesus left the beauty and the safety of heaven. But this was a monumental expression of his love, of his consideration for us. Jesus was simply saying, even though I was born in an obscure manger in an obscure village rather, and this was a message. It was not an accident. It said, I love you more than anything in the world. And it begs this question. It asks, what do you love first and foremost? During 3 years of ministry, Jesus thought of you. He had 3 short years to prepare a team to fulfill his dream for you. Jesus was not preoccupied by amusements or diversions. He wasn't obsessed with acquiring and consuming the world's goods. His life was not about money or pleasure or fame. One thing was on his mind when he got up. One thing was on his mind when he went to sleep. All kindnesses, conversions, parables, sermons, and miracles were acts of determined love for you. In Gethsemane, Jesus was thinking of you when he entered the garden to pray. He knew he would not leave a free man. He was sorrowful unto death, yet he was unafraid to die. At Golgotha, Christ was thinking of you as he hung on the cross. Inside the tomb, he was thinking of you on the day that he arose. Jesus was thinking of you when he left earth to return to glory in heaven. He presented his blood to atone for your sins. From heaven, he sent his spirit to comfort, to guide, and pray for you. From God's right hand, he intercedes for you. And every Lord's Day, he communes with you. At this moment, he's preparing a place for you. He is ever eager to return to you. In the meantime, he promised never to leave or forsake you. Imagine imagine the depth of love that produces such thoughtfulness. It boggles the mind and thrills the heart. Jesus said, "Whosoever will save his life will lose it, but whoever will lose his life will save it." And I will end with that note. Whosoever will save his life will lose it, but whoever will lose his life will save it. I did not finish today, but I will finish, Lord willing, next week. And when I step away from the podium, the man of the hour would be Rolf McDaniel. Thank you for your attention today. Lord willing, have a good, safe, blessed day, and some of you will see back this evening. Thank you for your time.